Happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome back to the Building an Enterprise Level System with Xero series. Just going to let everyone filter through as the digital queue comes through into this webinar. I've been so looking forward to today. It's been a brilliant last week of webinars in this series. So excited that we are at the halfway point today with webinar number 7 of the 14-part series. Got some amazing speakers for you this morning as we talk managing complex manufacturing and inventory processes, which, yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of close to my heart. I remember it would have been over a decade ago now. My job as financial controller at Fevertree, the mixer drinks business, one of my first tasks there was to implement an inventory system called OrderWise that had a form of integration with Sage Line 50. But that was a bit of a that was quite a painful process to get that up and running. So yeah, very shaped by my own experience, and really delighted to have the amazing panelists that we have with us today to talk complex manufacturing and inventory. So look, we're going to get started very soon. So just a couple of housekeeping points. You'll see the Q&A in the box below. Please do fire through any questions in there. We're going to do intros. We're going to do the discussion. We're going to cover what's coming up over the next 3 installments of the series. That'll take us to the full half hour, and then we'll have a Q&A as a bonus at the end. So very briefly, my name's David Tuck. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Mayday. Our mission is to mend month end, starting with the needs of multi-entity businesses, intercompany recharges, cross-entity bank reconciliation, keeping intercompany loans in balance. I qualified as an accountant at Deloitte. I've twice been a Xero using finance leader of multi-entity businesses. And with this series, really trying to create the resources I wish I'd had as a finance leader about how to best grow with Xero as our own accounting system. I've been an accounting tech entrepreneur for the last decade now, previously founded Chaffe, the accounts receivable automation business, and have spent the last couple of years building Mayday with my co-founder Griff and our amazing team. So in terms of framing this series, at Mayday, we're for larger Xero users. The majority of our customers have in-house finance teams, and we found they kept coming back to 2 questions. Is Xero still the right system for me? And if yes, how long will that be the case for? Indefinitely? Or at what point will I outgrow Xero? And the nature of uncertainty is that when we don't know something, it leads us to act earlier. The ERP move is horrible and hectic, as one of our customers described it. It's expensive, and 58% of ERP implementations fail. So what we're driving at with this series is this idea of ER peace of mind, the peace of mind of knowing that you can scale with Xero as your accounting system into your growth phase, and just how long that will remain the case. It's not product marketing. This series is framed from the backdrop of how can we be useful to our target customer. There's a reason I'm not wearing a Mayday t-shirt for any of these webinars. It's about righting the misconception that it's not possible to grow with Xero into your growth phase. But it's also not about overcorrecting. It's not about replacing one myth with another. There will be times where a business outgrows Xero, so we want to touch on those within the series as well. That's quite enough from me. I'm so thrilled to be joined by Keri Baker-Biggs, Matt Flanagan, and Amber Chaffe today. So Keri, over to you to lead us off in terms of intros.
Thanks, David. Yeah, thank you for the invitation to take part in this. It's really exciting. So my name is Keri Baker-Biggs, and I am General Manager of BookCheck X. BookCheck X is actually a sister company to BookCheck. So BookCheck provides monthly bookkeeping and monthly management accounts to our clients. But BookCheck X helps with Xero migrations primarily for our clients who have come to us on maybe a different software and want to move to Xero. And of course, that includes the apps as well. So today I'm here to talk about one of our clients, Stuart Golf, who is a multi-entity company, manufacturing business that have made the move to Xero.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Keri. Matt, over to you.
Morning, everyone. My name is Matt Flanagan, MD at BlueHub. So we help product-based businesses, those who make them and those who buy and sell, improve their efficiencies operationally with linking inventory systems and the whole ecosystem around inventory, which has its own little ecosystem, by linking all those together and helping businesses navigate that world and help them implementation, training, ongoing support. Based in Shropshire, team of 16.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Matt. Amber, over to you.
Hello, I'm Amber Chaffe, and I am the Head of Customer Success for Unleash Software, which is an inventory management system that integrates seamlessly with Xero. So we work with a wide range of customers that make, manage, and move products. And we've got customers from food manufacturers to customers that literally just sell nuts and bolts. So a wide range of products and businesses that we work with.
Fantastic. Great. So let's get to it. Managing complex manufacturing and inventory processes. So first off, Matt, just to frame us and make sure we're all aligned to what we're talking about here, what do we mean by managing complex manufacturing and inventory processes?
From a manufacturing perspective, these are the businesses which have lots of components which make up their final products, and there's lots of moving parts in terms of what we call class of bill of materials. So from a manufacturing perspective, it's those businesses which are managing the complexity of all of those components and the sales, the purchase element, and the stock control, as well as actually getting those through a production run. So from a manufacturing perspective, there's that side. The inventory it can be larger sales order volumes, different ways of taking sales online, offline, agents out on the road, and then managing how they fulfill that as well can be quite complex. And then the inventory control within that. So we talk in terms of people who make product and people who buy and sell product, and some of them do both of those as well, as you go through this. So that's how I tend to frame those two different scenarios.
Amazing. People who make product, people who ship product, and some will do both. Amazing.
Absolutely.
There we go.
I think
Amber.
as well, like when we're talking about inventory and we're talking about like sort of bigger customers, things like batch tracking and serial tracking and, you know, multi-warehouses. So when we're talking about these bigger businesses, we're talking about people that, you know, are operating across multi-levels, have different warehouses, loads of different moving parts, rather than it just being, you know, buy and sell. They're doing loads of different things with these products, and ultimately that can get quite complex.
Amazing. Well, look, and I think that segues brilliantly into to start us off. You know, when it comes to Xero and the native functionality that it has, what does it do well in terms of manufacturing and inventory? Matt, Keri, would love to get your thoughts on this.
So from my point of view, I mean, we've got clients who use Xero tracked inventory. They buy products and they don't do anything to them and they sell them. And it does that really well. It does that really well for if you're just buying a product, you know, then shipping it out to a customer, great. As soon as you start adding in the complexity of bills of material, as Matt said, and buying in components, that's when Xero can fall over. I mean, I do have clients that create bundles of products and they have a workaround within Xero, which is possible. But as soon as it gets any more complicated than that, that's when you need to start looking at an add-on.
Yeah, I concur. I think it's just the entry level to stock management. And I think to be fair to Xero, they have always said that we are going to be good at what we do. And then the ecosystem is to fill those areas. So we've touched on things like, you know, the batch tracking, you can't always get that, the serial element, the taking different ways of taking sales from the different sales channels. That's where, you know, Xero is a very limited capacity, really. So I always feel it's just like a stock management awareness. It gets you into the thinking. But what it is good for, in my opinion, is you start to understand what the workarounds are and what it doesn't do, which gives you a really good set of requirements to work out what you actually need going forward. So I think you should use it as a positive to go, okay, I understand I can do all these things, but that's the list of what I do need a product to do now, and that enables you to then think about what the next stage is going to be for your business.
I love that. Sorry, Abby, you go.
I think one of the things as well that we've noticed with customers that have started with Xero and then massively grown is the stock allocation side. So with Xero, the stock only really leaves Xero when you've invoiced it, which obviously doesn't always happen. So when you start growing and you actually can't visibly see what stock you have, unless you've invoiced it, it's still sat there in the system. So we've had customers that have come to us that have double sold because they thought that it was still available. And then there's things like part shipments as well. So if, I've got a customer and they buy 100 items, but they want to ship 10 at a time each month, Xero can't handle that. So you have to sort of backwards work to try and allocate it. So as soon as you start sort of having more complex needs, it starts to fall short. And growth is a big factor in that. So obviously, if you've got 20 or so products that you're selling, you might be able to visibly see what you've got and what you can sell. When you start expanding that list, it gets a lot harder with the allocation. And therefore, even if you're just buying and selling, Xero sometimes can't cut it.
Got it. And look, I think that segues brilliantly into the next point about what are those growing pains. I love that idea, Matt, of using Xero's native functionality from an inventory perspective, almost as like a training ground for finding out what you need. And Amber highlights brilliantly there around the stock tracking being decoupled from invoicing as a pain point, part shipping. Keri, we'd love to come to you first. Particularly in relation to the experience with Stuart Golf, like what were the pains which meant the core inventory functionality in Xero was not going to be enough?
Okay, yes. So Stuart Golf came to us. When they came to us, they were on Sage 200. So on paper, that seems like a perfect fit for them. They're a manufacturing company. It dealt with everything. But one of their biggest pain points with Sage 200 was primarily Stuart Golf are an e-commerce business, and their sales platforms weren't connecting. They also, the cost of Sage 200, and they were losing support for their manufacturing module, which was obviously key to them, made them think about moving somewhere else. And I think they must have seen, Xero's doing all this marketing on the TV, etc. I think they'd seen it and they liked the look of it. They liked the idea of it being in the cloud. But because I had done their bookkeeping for a couple of years, I knew Xero alone wasn't going to be enough. And primarily that was around multi-level bills of material, including subcontractor processes. So there was, parts which they would buy in, they'd ship somewhere else, they'd do a bit of manufacturing on it, they'd come back, and serial tracking. So I think we've already touched on that, batch tracking, etc. But all of their finished goods have a serial number. And if there's warranty claims, etc., they needed to be able to track where the parts, etc., the batteries and everything else, where they'd gone, which finished goods they'd gone into. So it was immediately, obviously, although they loved the look of Xero, that was just almost going to become a bolt-on to something else, which was going to be their day-to-day system to control all their sales, all their purchases, tracking their stock. And in that, they were also able to, remove this pain point of sort of having to manually enter their sales invoices into Sage 200, which, they were growing massively. And, whilst it was maybe they could cope with the levels at the point they were at, they needed to automate that. So that was a huge driver for them to look at, something with Xero.
Amazing. And Matt, anything else from your side in terms of what those growing pains are?
I think in terms of like the growth aspirations of the business, I think that's one area. We're also seeing some of the triggers actually is generational changes in business ownership. So that's quite a new one. So some of the pain points can be when we're out of support and like that, but people are aware of this very API driven world now. So they might go with a Shopify and then they've got a Xero and it's like, what's the middle ground now? And that ecosystem is very much API driven. I think in terms of some of the issues, I think definitely like sales channels is definitely an area where that's really hard to integrate with the older systems and more server-based systems. And I think also just actually like go back what Amber said earlier, like just the visibility of where we are with components, sales, the purchasing cycle, the production cycle. I think that's been, although there's these bigger systems, maybe not optimized fully in terms of how you can use them. So I think where there's been no middle ground, where you go from a Sage 50, maybe touch a Sage 50 manufacturing, then you're up to Sage 200 or something different, there's now a bit more of a middle ground to move into, which I don't think was there. So there's almost a massive leap, not optimized leap, and then there's a middle ground which can fit, and I'm sure Amber will agree, but we've got clients coming off Opera, Sage 200, even NetSuite coming to look at these types of systems now. So I think there's a bit of a sea change at the moment, a bit of awareness, and I think that's been definitely helped by Xero and also the likes of Shopify, really, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, we had a customer quite recently that moved back from NetSuite. So they discovered Xero was too big for them, too small for them, sorry, and went straight to NetSuite. They spent like a year trying to implement it. They spent thousands of pounds trying to implement it, and it just wasn't going anywhere. It was too complex. It just wasn't what they needed at that time. And they could have carried on implementing it and could have got to the point where they used it, but they wouldn't have been using all the functionality because they weren't ready for some of those other levels. So they actually came to Unleashed. We had a conversation about what they needed, ticked all of the boxes, and we managed to implement it within 6 weeks. So that middle ground is really important if you don't need that massive step up, not just because, you know, it can do everything that you need, but also it's not as costly. You don't spend as long on implementing it. And also you can grow it out quite easily. So as you grow, obviously there's all these other apps which you've learned about in this series and you'll continue to learn about that you can add on as and when you need. So instead of spending thousands of pounds on this massive system that you're not going to use straight away, you can add bits on and actually you get a better return on investment because you're using them as you go and you're building up to a bigger system.
And just to pick up on that point with Stuart Golf with the scalability, so Stuart Golf have a UK entity which was their primary, you know, that was the reason they were looking for this system, but they also had a US entity which was just like plodding along in the background. But actually with COVID they saw their US sales rocket and they already had the systems in place to deal with that growth and that scalability. And as you say, Amber, they're adding on extra bits to build this platform that they need, which is growing with them, which I think is just such a key part to this.
Amazing. And just to pick up, sorry, Matt, you go. No, let's go.
I was just going to add one thing as well. I think there is one myth at the moment that using Xero is linked to the size of your business. And I think that is a true myth, because it's actually what we find is the complexity of workflow will dictate. And there is a level, but we've got businesses on the products that we utilize, like for 40 million turnover, multi-region, working across the world. And then we've got smaller businesses, 500,000, £1 million turnover. But in the same time, only 2 weeks ago, we couldn't work with somebody because they had so many wacky internal processes and they're only £750,000 turnover. They would fit in terms of a demographic, you would fit really. So I think there is a myth that we can definitely debunk, which is this is not linked to your turnover or your how many employees you've got. This is really linked to your internal workflows and your integrations and your sales channels and everything else we talked about, and your requirements, which will dictate whether this type of platform is an option for you or not.
Fantastic. And that's so crisp, Matt. And that, I think that encapsulates brilliantly the theme that we've seen time and again across this series, that your use of Xero is not linked to size. That's a myth. It's linked to the complexity of your processes. And so just to touch on that before we get into sort of stories from the ecosystem, if you will, when it comes to manufacturing and inventory, you know, when we talk complexity of processes, like what are the ones that are the immediate indicators, if any, that Xero plus its ecosystem is not going to be a fit for you and you should head straight to an ERP system like a NetSuite?
Well, firstly, I'll challenge you on what an ERP is nowadays, because I think we had this conversation. We have our clients who have come off the bigger systems who consider Sin7 Core, which is the prime system we work with, as an ERP. So it's like, now what is an ERP, and is that the right one? It might be a mini ERP or a mid-tier ERP, and going through there. But at the moment, honestly, it's down to, it's not like it's literally different workflows that come up for us. So it's very much as it comes along. There's a scenario which might be how they co-manufacture, and that's more of a process where they send out to a group of people to get a group of prices, then get a better price back, and then send it out. That's become harder in our world to manage, and maybe there's differences there. But in general, it'll either be integrations or maybe some of the voluminous elements, certainly to do lots of bill of materials, and it's high volume, lots of components, maybe lots of levels of bill of material. Then it starts to stretch the systems we work with. But yeah, it's really hard to say. It's always going to be, they say this one thing and it's not for us. There's always some sort of discovery, a few stages before we actually get to that point of saying it's not going to be fit.
Yeah,
Only like, just before you go on, but the only thing I would say is, like, normally the timeline is the killer. Like, can we go live next week? And it's like, you do know this is like quite a big implementation. I would say that is the one. Sorry, Amber.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. We've got massive customers as well. It's very much to do with individual needs. I think where we start to struggle personally with Unleashed is where we have hundreds of warehouses and you've got hundreds of thousands of stock items, and you're actually this massive operation. And that's when the software can get quite slow, and maybe that's when you'd want to look for an ERP. But you know, we still work with customers that have multiple warehouses and thousands of products. It's that real next level where it starts to look like you would need an ERP, and obviously with complex manufacturing as well. So where you've got bombs within bombs within bombs within bombs, it can start getting a bit too much. But yeah, like Matt said, there's a discovery process of, you know, what are you doing and can we help you? And if we can, we're always quite honest and upfront with customers to say, actually, this isn't going to work for you.
Amazing. Well, look, that's brilliant. Yeah, it comes through really clearly, you know, at the most extreme end, sort of integrations and volumes of transactions and warehouses. But similar to Matt's point earlier about, you know, Xero's native functionality, test that to find out, you know, where the needs are. Feels like there's almost a sort of stepping stone next level of test Xero plus the ecosystem to really, you know, find out if there are actually complexities that mean you can't work with it. And that's really the whole point of this series, right? Trying to debunk that myth that it's not possible. I'm really keen now to focus on your own stories from what you've been able to do with Xero plus its ecosystem. So Keri, if I can come to you first, you talked about Stuart Golf's journey, the move from Sage 200, looking around, you know, finding Xero plus Unleashed. Would love to hear, like, you know, what's the results, what's the end of that story that Stuart Golf have been able to achieve?
Yes, so just massive growth, I guess, is the easiest way to say it. So obviously, as I said before, they had a really clunky process with Sage 200. We removed that by going to Xero plus Unleashed, but also with Unleashed, they were able to integrate their shipping platforms. So that's now all integrated. As I said, Shopify was integrated. And with the US, I mean, this whole process started just before COVID. So when COVID hit, they now had a cloud-based system. So they weren't, you know, it did enable their office staff to work remotely. So that was a big plus point. But also, Stuart Golf manufacture golf trolleys that follow you around a golf course. And in the US, when COVID struck, they banned golf carts, as in the buggies that you sit in, to go around the golf courses. So they saw their US sales skyrocket because it meant you could go on the golf course, you didn't have to carry your bag, you know, you didn't have to have a caddy, they would follow you around. And as a result of that, they've now making use of like the multi-warehouse functionality in Unleashed because they've had to open more distribution centers within the US. It's just enabled them to grow without having extra pain points. I just wanted to pick up on one, sorry, I should have mentioned it before, but one little thing. One concern that Stuart Golf had about Xero and an add-on was that with this growth was the number of sales going through the platform and hitting those daily API limits. But obviously with using the add-on, because they don't need to know all the nitty-gritty detail on a customer basis, because it's mainly business to customer, they were able to consolidate everything and push it through to Xero as consolidated. So that eliminated that worry. Yes, I know, if they get very, if there's other things which they might have to consider in the future, but, that was their main concern, that they would outgrow it very quickly. And of course, they haven't. They're just growing and growing and growing.
Amazing. And so, Matt, over to you. We've got Keri's fantastic kind of story there with Stuart Gulf and what they've been able to do. We'd love to get your sort of macro perspective across the clients you've worked with. What have they been able to achieve with Xero Plus's ecosystem?
I think at the moment, growth is an obvious one, but I think one of the key things is the ability to grow with how the world is changing. So we're starting to see connectors, like we've got people selling on TikTok and Shopify and Etsy and all these different channels. Now, literally, they're starting to roll out, within months of those shops starting to be available. So I think the changing world, these systems are all starting to, whether it's the actual system itself, like the IMS, the inventory management system, or whether it's the ecosystem that grows around that. That's one of the key things I've seen. We've come up with a challenge, worked the ecosystem, spoke to the ecosystem, and they start to plug those gaps and say, right, we'll start to work in that world with them and plug that. So we've not really come up against where we've got a dead end. It might be we can't do anything right now for that particular sales channel, but that's definitely a thing where the ecosystem is really starting to plug. So for me, it's no longer a Xero ecosystem. It's an inventory management system ecosystem in this world. And I think this thing of I'm going to leave Xero plus another inventory management system, I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work, because a lot of the ecosystem, so let's take a Ship Theory or some of the reporting platforms, we've got a client who's been on since 5 years, also in the golf world. They've moved to NetSuite. They've kept Ship Theory. They've kept their reporting. They're still working in the same ecosystem because they're now starting to move up and down that ladder of ERP, if you like. So I think it's quite an interesting area. And I think we've just seen like Approval Max. They started to plug into some of the inventory management systems. They're also plugging into NetSuite. They also plug into Xero and QBO and the rest. So I think this is quite an interesting world where this ecosystem is no longer going to be Xero's. And for us who work in inventory management and manufacturing, there's this ecosystem which starts to work up and down the chain. So we're speaking to clients going, oh, hey, go and look at Ship Theory. Well, we might go into NetSuite in 5 years. Yep, that's going to work with you still. You're not leaving that. So it's not en masse you might leave. You might leave the IMS system due to some more complexity, some more scale, some what Amber touched on about just the growth that these systems can't handle. But you don't have to leave the whole of your platform. There's probably going to be two key parts, be your account and your inventory, but the rest of your supporting area, even things like EDI, which is a big shift for people where they're going to start interacting with the big retailers, the boots and things. You can start on that on these systems, and you can still live with those as you move through the tranches. So it gives you a really good base level up to an intermediate, up to a high level intermediate, and then you go to the advanced. So I think this ecosystem is actually pretty exciting for inventory management and manufacturers at the moment.
Amazing. And Amber, as an exponent within this ecosystem, I'm going to segue into the kind of closing finale that we do for the discussion. Would love to come to you first when it comes to your top tip for scaling with Xero, and then I'll come to Matt and to Keri.
So there's actually a question in the Q&A, and this kind of answers it. So a good little segue. I've kind of got two. So the first one would be, don't leave it too long to explore options. So one of the things that I've seen is that customers are on Xero and they have quite complex needs. And rather than look for a system, they've started building out all of these Excel sheets. They've got loads of external processes, and it just becomes a bit of a headache and it gets too much. And then when you try and translate these into an inventory system, because you're so used to it, it's a lot harder. So I would say if you're looking to scale, don't wait until you've already got to the point where you've got those inventory headaches. Actually go and do it ASAP. And then my second tip would be, and this answers the question, there's so many different systems and stuff out there. All of these systems will usually have a free trial. Go and have a play with it, get to grips with it, understand if its usability is what you need, but go and have chats with people. There's, you can get a free discovery call. Most of these apps, not just the inventory side, but all of them will offer you a demo and show you around. Take advantage of those and just explore actually what really fits your needs and make sure you're asking really good questions.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Amber. Matt, over to you for your top tip.
I'm going to go back to requirements, a bit boring, but like one of the key things we get is we speak to somebody and they've got a list of like loose requirements that they want. And then you speak to the rest of the wider team and those requirements don't quite match or they're not on the same page. Like if you're looking at this, whether it's inventory system or anything else, like sit down as a group and list down what are your must-haves and your nice-to-haves and what's day one and what's day 80 or 90 further down the line. So I think if you get that list together, that brings everyone onto the same understanding of what you're looking for. Because if you turn up and you've got some recency bias on a problem you had last week, and you get told about that this system will solve it, you solve that one problem, then the other 10, 12 things this system has to do are long forgotten until we get the system up and running. So if you're embarking on this, even before you take your free trial, get those list of things, or you're going to speak to someone discovering and get those lists together as a group, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5 of you, and agree on what that list of requirements are. And then you'll have a much better understanding of what you're looking for, as will the people you're speaking to, and you'll have a much better understanding of what the system will do and won't do against your core requirements.
Amazing. And Keri, over to you, your top tip.
So mine's more of a general, when you're approaching this, is have an open mind. Don't come to it thinking that won't work because I know it's too small or I need this. Have an open mind, because it might not be that you need one app. You might need 2 apps. You might need 3 apps, but just have an open mind. And as Matt said, having those requirements is key to that, but don't come with it with sort of preconceptions of that's not going to do the job.
Fantastic. So that's been an incredible discussion today. I'm just going to highlight what's coming up over the next 3 days. So tomorrow, we've got Optimize FX Rates and Automate Reconciliation with Chris Carter from EventWise, John Toon from Beaver and Struthers, and James Scobie from Airwallex. Then on Friday, we've got Automate and Enhance your accounts receivable process with David Rowland from Energize, Vicky Ellis from Not Just Numbers, Joe Wood, Virtual FD, and Chris Ichapleo from Chaser. And then on Monday next week, we've got Plan Effectively for Every Scenario with Sophie Conahan from Rora, John Gaunt from FD Works, and Taimur Abdal from Causal. So, incredible discussion today. There's been some great questions that have come through in the Q&A that Amber's done a sterling job of answering. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amber. There's a couple here that I'm really keen to kind of pick up on. So firstly, Mark Hodges has a question of, with inventory, how many transactions is too many transactions for Xero when using a third-party app? And I know, Keri, you talked about this earlier when it came to consolidating. And just for context, we ran through on the launch webinar the stated transaction limits in Xero, where they talk about 1,000 invoices a month, 1,000 bills per month, 4,000 tracked inventory items per month. But I appreciate those are just guidelines. So I'm really, really keen, Keri, Matt, Amber, what's your perspective on Mark's question?
So from my perspective, I mean, from obviously Amber can answer more about Unleashed, but using Unleashed with Stuart Golf and Xero, we overcame those daily API limits. We would have exceeded them massively, probably from day one. And obviously with the growth they've seen, that would have been, just crazy. We would have hit those limits every single day, and that would have slowed everything down. But having Unleashed in there, we haven't come across that problem, and probably Amber can expand on that.
Yeah, so there is the transaction limit. However, as Keri was saying previously, you can group orders. So with your B2C orders, what you'd actually do is have your B2C platform directly connected to Xero, and you'd bulk send them in whatever volume that you'd want to send them. And therefore, you wouldn't hit that limit because you're only sending 1 or 2 transactions. Where you've got loads of B2B orders, that's where it does get a bit harder. So if you had thousands of B2B orders, then you'd hit that transaction limit. But there's workarounds that we could suggest whereby, you know, you're not using that part of the integration and you're doing one manual invoice and that sort of thing. But for B2C, which is where the volume usually is easily solved with just connecting up Xero to whatever your B2C platform is.
Only thing I was going to add is we're just to give you some ideas, we've got a client at the moment who is scaling 10,000 a month to 70,000 a month. We're just doing some testing on that. So, you know, these aren't small numbers. It's not in the tens or the hundreds. I mean, it's hard to say because it depends exactly how you're transacting and what you're doing. But as Amber said, there are ways of looking at this. But, you know, you shouldn't be, it's hard to give like a definitive because it does depend how you transact and how you're going to consolidate them before they come through. But yeah, we're looking at the moment with a client with a 7 times growth over the next sort of 2.5 years. We're trying to model that out a little bit at the moment. So yeah, can achieve some big numbers. Yeah.
I mean, what comes through clearly is it was Keri's top tip about keep an open mind. I guess it's, yeah, keep an open mind, have a handle on what your number of transactions are and what your projected number of transactions are. And then, you know, linking to Amber's point, have a discussion with the inventory solution, make that clear to them. And, you know, who knows, there might be a potential workaround there. And that kind of leads me on to next question. Amber, you asked about the kind of, you know, have discussions with different solutions. You know, would love the perspective, you know, I guess from, you know, Keri and Matt having, you know, having been in this situation, what are the most important things to ask in a procurement process?
I'll go back to your list. I would say come and speak to me or come and speak to Keri, but if you come to me with a list, it's much easier to go through and have a structured conversation. So if you are thinking about that move, what are the things that are mandatory must have from this new system, and what are the nice to haves that we'd like to do? So, and then you can go with a structure to go and speak to whether you're going to use an implementer like ourselves, or you're going to go direct with a vendor and go like Amber. It's great to have something that you can hold a structure to the conversation. I think if you go in, like I said earlier, with the recency bias around tracking category issues, you'll get sold on that tracking category issue, and then the rest of your issues are gone. And that's no good for any of us, really, if we don't know the whole story. So personally, your first step is to sit down and list down what you want around that.
And I'll just echo that I always say it's your must-haves and your nice-to-haves, because you might not get a system that's going to give you every possible thing that you want, but it's working out what are your you can't live without and what are your nice-to-haves, so that you can then have those structured conversations.
I would also say to map out your processes if you can. So if we know what your current processes are, we can then demonstrate how that would work in Unleashed. And it's not going to be exactly the same. There's going to be differences, and you know, you need to be happy with those differences. But if you can tell us what those processes are, we can show them we can show you the workflow from Unleashed to Xero and what that would look like for you specifically.
Amazing. Well, look, that's everything for today. Alison has just posted in the Q&A to say thank you all. Brilliant info. And I would just like to echo Alison's comments. It's been incredible to benefit from your insights today. Keri, Matt, Amber, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you, everyone who has attended today, and look forward to seeing you over the course of the rest of the series. Please do register at enterprise.getmayday.com. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Cheers all.
Thanks
all.
everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.